Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for UK's Virtual Family Weekend 2.0, and specifically for this presentation on the history of UK student life. We are excited to have Ruth Bryan, UK's archivist, with us here today to share some great information. And Ruth, I don't know if you recall from our previous conversations that I was an undergraduate history major, and so I am so excited to see what you have to share with us. And then my very favorite class in graduate school here at UK was the history of higher education with Dr. John Thielen, who literally wrote the book on the history of higher education. So I know that we're all going to learn a lot from you here today and appreciate you being here with us. Just a little bit of housekeeping for folks watching on YouTube. I will be monitoring the chat throughout Ruth's presentation. And so if you have questions, feel free to put them there and we will pass them along to her. And I'll know she'll be good enough to share contact information at the end for any questions that may come up or that we may not have time for during today's presentation. So with that, Ruth, take it away. Thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nancy, and to Nikki and all the other folks that have planned Family Weekend 2.0. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to share a little bit about UK history with everybody. And I'm going to start off by saying that I'm actually a newbie kind of to UK. I've only been here since 2011. So there's still a lot I don't know. And so for those of you out there who are listening now or who will be listening later, I'm sure everybody has their own experiences of UK, and it'd be great to hear more about those either now or later. So I'm going to do 4 things in this presentation. I'm going to give you an overview of UK, sort of the development of the university. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what has stayed the same over the years, in my opinion, and then what has changed over the years, again, sort of how I see it in the historical record, and then some final words sort of about the university overall. And you see here some of the logos that we've had over the years. KSC is for Kentucky State College. So the university started as the Agricultural and Mechanical College of what was then called Kentucky University. It was founded by the legislature in 1865. The first classes matriculated in 1866, and at that time, the campus was at where Ashlands is now, along with another estate that was contiguous to that called Woodlands. A&M College was founded as one of the land-grant colleges that was established by the Morrill Act of 1862. And the focus of all the land-grant colleges across all of the United States was to focus on teaching agriculture, engineering, which they called mechanical arts, and military science with liberal arts to mostly white young men who couldn't afford the private universities that were available at that time. So in 1878, the legislature made A&M College independent from Kentucky University. Kentucky University went on to basically become Transylvania University today. And at that time, the college was called State College. Between 1878 and 1880, the city of Lexington offered 52 acres of what had been a former park to the college to build their new buildings on. And you see here in this picture what those original 4 buildings were in 1882, which is when classes started being held at the campus. There was a president's house, a dormitory, a steam plant, and the college building. And the college, the main building or the administration building, you can see here in the bottom left, is the only building that remains from those very first buildings from 1882. And the top of it looks a little different, and the interior is a lot different because there was a 2004 fire, so it was renovated extensively then. So in 1908, the legislature made State College State University, and then in 1916, fairly quickly after that, the legislature gave it its current name, which is University of Kentucky. And this is approximately what the campus looked like in 1916. And I've indicated here some of the buildings that remain from that time period between 1882 and 1916. And we actually have quite a few of them that were built in kind of that first couple of years, well, 20 years or so, while the university was finding its footing, moving from being a college to a university. And you can see that limestone and upper were already split at that time. And there was an electric car service, which you can see down there in the corner, that went up and down Limestone Street. So one of the things that I've noticed in looking at the historical record is that basically there's been a continuous growth for the university from especially starting from when it moved to its current campus in 1882. And I've sort of shown that visually here by saying these original buildings, this is a view from 1890, basically encompass that little circle of things in the 2021 campus map. So it gives you a sense of sort of the scope of how the campus has changed. So here's another way of looking at it. In 1882, the university started out with 52 acres. Already by 1918-ish, it was 468 acres. And this is approximately what the college looked like in 1918. And then in 2021, we have just right here in downtown Lexington, over 814 acres. And this doesn't count the experiment stations and other research stations and Coldstream Farm, all outside of the main center of Lexington. One thing I do want to say is that the expansion of the university in terms of land did have fairly significant consequences for the neighborhoods that were around that original 52 acres. And I want to particularly mention three of them. Two of them, Adamstown and Prahltown, are/were historic African-American neighborhoods. Prahltown is still a neighborhood. Adamstown was raised to make way for Memorial Coliseum. There was also a neighborhood where Young Library is right now called Clifton Heights. And that was a neighborhood especially of immigrants from World War II who came to work at the university. So here's another way of looking at UK's progress, just sort of the sheer number of students. So around 1880, when that change from being A&M College to State College happened, there were just 234 people. So it was tiny. Still in 1916, which was the 50th anniversary, there were only just under 1,000 students. Then we started climbing fairly significantly to almost 14,000. And then by the 150th, which we celebrated in 215, we had just under 31,000. And now in 2021, we have a little over 31,000 students. By the way, the gap in these charts is where I couldn't find any data. So I also wanted to look a little bit more deeply at gender and race. As I mentioned before, the college started out as a place where white young men were able to matriculate. Women were allowed to matriculate starting in 1880, but only in the normal school, meaning they were only to be educated to be teachers. So we started out with 43 women in 1880. And that has slowly climbed, as you can see here, through this period of the 20th anniversary, the 100th anniversary. And then interestingly, in this 50 years, between 1965 and 2015, the gender balance has shifted so that there are more women than men who now attend the University of Kentucky. So looking a little bit at the university's enrollment by race or ethnicity, again, the university has been a historically white institution. So this shows in some of our demographics here. And we haven't been keeping very many, very accessible statistics on race of students before 2000. So this chart only goes from 2000 to about 2020. So you can see that we're still very predominantly a white university. And this is something that the university is working hard on to sort of build a more welcoming and inclusive environment for students of color. And I think you're going to hear more about that in another presentation. So yet another way to look at the overview. And I just wanted to point out a little bit of sort of like the sheer number of degrees offered in 2015 versus in 1916. You know, the amounts that you had to pay have changed a lot. It's a little bit difficult to balance those against, you know, how much, say, a daily wage was or how much a loaf of bread was costing. But I also wanted to point out the sheer number of student organizations that have proliferated as the university has gotten a lot larger and a lot more complex and a lot more diverse. So in 2015, we had 500 plus student organizations versus 28 in 1916. So what stayed the same over the years? And my cat is coming to join us, which happens sometimes. So I would suggest that these things have stayed the same even with the pandemic, because, for example, there's still an application process, an admissions process, and a registration process. Of course, the way you do this has changed over the years, and what you needed to have in order to apply has changed. But one of the things that I think is something we forget about with all of our computerized systems is that registration for years involved standing in line and having pieces of paper that you had to take to different places and going to different booths. And here you see a scene in Memorial Coliseum where that was happening. So it was a really big deal to register. I don't know when the computerized system started, but it hasn't been that long ago. So this was a decades-long experience for students at UK. So the experience of being a student is the experience of living in groups, eating in groups, and socializing together. And I think that hasn't changed for the whole time that really any school has been in session. And I think even with the pandemic, my experience is that this has not changed. So you see here two men in their dorm room in the original Holmes Hall in the 1940s. The Kaylair Grill, which was a favorite spot for people to congregate. This view is in 1955. Kirwan Blanding Complex sort of had a soft opening from like 1966 through 1968. And one of the big deals about Kirwan Blanding is that it offered co-ed graduate housing. And you see here two folks studying together in one of their dorm rooms. So, and of course, the Student Union is a clear center of student activity and has been since it was built, I think, in 1936. So you see here some folks eating together in 1986 and again in 2013. And studying is a key point of student life. So I love this picture of the young woman here in 1965 studying and taking notes, playing with her hair. That I think is a pretty common activity. I also love this picture of young women in the 1890s. I think, I'm not entirely sure, this picture is undated, doing their schoolwork. I presume somewhere in Patterson Hall, which was the women's dorm for a long time. It was built in 1904. You know, studying often leads to sleep, as we see here in this picture of 2014. This was in Young Library. And then we have a picture from 1952 of M.I. King Library. And that is my background. Picture here is the front of the Margaret I. King Library, and that's where my office is. So rooting for the Wildcats is something that has stayed constant over the years as well. Football started in 1892 and men's basketball started 1904, I think. So we've had sports games to take in for a long time. This is part of the crowd in 1917 in Stoll Field, which is still a field, but it doesn't have the stands on it that it used to have. Here are folks waiting for the men's basketball team to come back from an away game in 1952 at the Lexington train station. Here is a group of very well-dressed people attending a football game at McLean Stadium, which was built on the site of Stoll Field. One of the things about attending football for quite some decades in the 20th century is that you went as couples, and the women usually wore, and everybody dressed up, and the women usually wore corsages, very often of chrysanthemums. Here are more women cheering in McLean Stadium in 1972. The stadium was torn down that year. And Commonwealth Stadium was built and is now in use, you can see here, in 1974. This is a set of fans in Rupp Arena, where the men's basketball team played from the time Rupp Arena was built, 1978, 79, I think. And then, of course, the Singing of My Old Kentucky Home, also in Rupp Arena. This is from 2014. So then a key feature of student life through the years has been a ceremony to mark graduation. And a lot of those ceremonies in the early years were outdoors. So you can see here this view from 1910. And I want to point out, you can see there's somebody sitting on the cannon. So that's a Spanish-American War vintage cannon, and it's been present on campus for a really long time. Here's a convocation procession from 1917. Here's what convocation or commencement looked like in McLean Stadium. So one of the things about the expanding student body is the question of where to put everybody when you need to do university-wide events. So that moved to Memorial Coliseum once it was built in 1950. And then everybody outgrew Memorial Coliseum as well. And so now we have commencement in Rupp Arena. And I recognize as I say this that we didn't have commencement in 2020, but we're going to have a combined commencement coming up. So hopefully everybody can participate in that. So what has changed over the years? So one of the really interesting things is that there was this whole thing about clothing for many decades of the 20th century. So freshmen men wore beanies for a really long time. And I couldn't figure out when that started, but it certainly went into the 1960s, as you can see here from this picture in 1965. There was also sort of a several decades long focus of seniors wearing corduroys and also carrying canes, and only senior men could wear corduroy, and only for a particular period of time. So it was part of kind of the end of the year process of moving from being senior into not being a student anymore. And these are, I think it started around 1906 from what I can tell. And these are civil engineering seniors wearing their corduroys. So as I was doing some of this research, I found this mention of this hello walk, which sounded pretty interesting to me. It sort of came and went in this period between 1944 and 1963. And I think part of it was kind of to bring the campus together during World War II. And it looked like it happened in different places along campus. The basic idea was there were these signs all along the walkways. You can see it here in the picture that says hello walk. And the deal is, except when classes are changing and it's too thronged to do this, every person you see on the sidewalk, you have to stop and speak to. And it's a way to get to know people. So in the 1963 Kentucky Kernel article I read, they talked about the walk being from the Student Center, which is number 77 here on the bottom right, to Funkhauser, which is at the top there. And that's a pretty long way to go and have to speak to everybody. But I thought that was kind of a neat tradition. So there's this whole sort of early 20th to mid 20th century, actually through 1993, tradition of doing something in May. And it started out with what they called Arbor Day, which went from about 1908 to 1925. And this event was very much focused on the senior class. So the senior class planted a tree. You can see the tree there in the circle of folks. And they processed, the senior women and the senior men processed toward the tree planting area. Then the tree was planted and there was a speech by the senior class president. And then the senior class, and each member of the senior class threw a clod of dirt on the tree. And then the senior class president passed the shovel to the junior class president, who responded to the senior class president's speech with another speech. Then the class prophet, who was usually one of the women, gave her predictions for what the members of the senior class would do. And one of the things to remember is that, again, this is a really tiny student body. So it was possible to have all of these very individual experiences with everyone that allowed a class prophet to actually have something to say. So in addition, I should say that in addition to all of the tree planting, there were two senior honorary groups, one for the men and one for the women. And at this point, they also tapped their junior members who would become senior members the following year. So Arbor Day sort of morphed into May Day, which, there was sort of maybe a little bit of this starting in 1911-ish or something like that, but really it started in earnest, I think about 1922, and went for quite a while until maybe 55, 57. It's a little bit hard to tell. So May Day started out with the women of the university sort of electing a May Queen and doing sort of a maypole dance as part of a celebration of May. And you can see here, there's sort of a thing happening in the center there, I think that must be about the Queen. And then we have the Maypole dance as a part of the 1920s May Day activities. Then it quickly, in the early 1930s, started adding all the Arbor Day pieces. So the senior class planted a tree. There was a convocation added to, sort of with speeches and to give out awards, especially to members of the senior class. And the court process started getting a lot larger. You see here, there's even a jester as well as a queen. And there's a person with a bugle on the far right-hand side here. There were also acrobatics and performances as a part of the crowning of the Queen. There was a really big parade every year as a part of May Day, and lots of individual campus organizations, including fraternities and sororities, the band, other organizations put together floats every year to put in this parade. Here's one from 1940. So this is one of the last pictures I could find. It's definitely from the 1950s. And by that point, sort of 1955-ish, the whole sort of doing May Day was starting to be a lot of work for everybody. And a lot of the fraternities and sororities and student organizations were no longer having the time to put all their floats together. So that's when the Student Activities Board started the Little Kentucky Derby, which I think started in 1957. It certainly went till 1993, then was revived again for a few years between 2009 and 2012. So the big difference between Arbor Day and May Day and Little Kentucky Derby is that Arbor Day and May Day were about celebrating the senior class, whereas the Little Kentucky Derby was a scholarship fundraiser. So I think that's kind of interesting too. It sort of shows, I think, the change in perspective across the university of the student body about what the student body was kind of aiming for as a group. So the Little Kentucky Derby really had a lot of varied events over the years. It started out with a bike relay for the men and what they called the debutante stakes, which was tricycle races for women. And each fraternity and sorority pretty much fielded their own team. That was where the competition came from. There's was always a court, and mainly it was for electing women, but kings were elected occasionally, started from 1974 onward. There was a pushcart derby as a part of this sometimes. I love this picture of the ugly face contest. So, sort of in the 70s, it started, the Little Kentucky Derby started getting, having a lot of different events that happened over different years. So there was a tug of war, a mattress run, a foot race, in the 1980s, maybe sometimes a golf tournament, or what they called a splash, which was, I think, that members of individual fraternities and sororities, sat in a dunking, above a dunking pool, and people could try to hit them and dunk them in the pool. And then one of the really big deals later on of the Little Kentucky Derby was the balloon races. And you see here a couple of pictures of what that looked like in the 1980s. There were also some, what they called the run for the rodents. There was also a turtle run sometimes, I think mainly from the 1970s. Also in the 1980s, there was a big carnival associated with the Little Kentucky Derby because it started becoming a community event as well as a university event. And then there was a Run for the Rose obstacle course as well. So finally, what has remained from all of this sort of May activity is the ping pong ball drop, which if you have been a student at UK in the last couple years or even more, you will be very familiar with this. It began about 1985, and the Student Activities Board drops a whole bunch of ping pong balls off the Patterson office tower. And the idea is that if you pick up a marked ball, you can take the ball and get a prize for it. And this is the tradition that has continued forward from the end of the Little Kentucky Derby to now. And here's a picture from 2017 with a lot of smart people using umbrellas to catch their ping pong balls. So one of the things that's been a really key feature of life at first A&M College and then State College and then the University of Kentucky is the military science portion of the curriculum. So men were required to do military science and drills from 1866 to 1963. And until the ROTC program was established, which I have forgotten the acronym of, but it'll come to me, that involved drills and reveille and marching and things like that. This is a lineup of soldiers from 1918. I think these are actually not all university students because the university hosted soldiers getting mechanical training on campus. Reserve Officer Training Corps, right. It was established at the university in 1917. And just a little pause here. I think a lot of people have heard about this already, but the university did have its own experience with the 1918 flu epidemic. And you see here on the right, nurses wearing masks. This is a very common sight for us now that we all wear masks when we are outside interacting with people. And you see here on the left, some of those 1918 soldiers recuperating from the flu in what we now call alumni gym. So here's a group of men from 1930 who would be part of the required participation of all men students in the ROTC basic training course. And here is a group in 1940, right? Just before the US entered World War I or World War II. And then we have some pictures of sort of some more recent military participants, ROTC participants, both Air Force and Army. And it was in 1963 that the ROTC program became an elective and women were able to join starting in 1966. So one of the really interesting traditions at UK that I don't know very much about, but there you can see in pictures, is this whole thing of painting your class number on buildings. So from the picture, what I see in the pictures, it looks like it was at least from 1900 to 1923, but I don't know what they called this. So without knowing what they called it, it's hard to search text to find out about it. You know, I don't think they called it building tagging then because the word tagging meant something else. So I don't know what they called it, but you can see from the pictures that they did it. And it's kind of amazing to think about how they got up there to do it. So this is Miller Hall with the 15 on the top there for the class of 1915. These are the buildings of the original engineering quadrangle, none of which exists today, but you can see on the left here, we've got 08. And then I think we have an O there in the middle on the short building. And then we have a 10 on the building on the far right. They also tagged the cannon. So here's the cannon tagged with the class of 1911. And there was an observatory on campus. And so you can see that that was tagged with the class of 1923. Another really big feature of life in the first part of the 20th century were class contests. And the freshman and sophomore classes often had not football games and these ones that I'm going to share with you now. And the juniors and seniors had class contests as well. So this flag rush didn't last for very long, really from about only 1908 to 1912. And it looks like it was pretty much a melee. You can see at this right-hand picture, just real wrestling happening here. And the deal was the freshman boys protected their flag and the sophomore boys had to rush it and get it. And you can see there in the middle picture, one of the sophomores is climbing the flagpole to get the flag. So 1912, university administrators asked the classes to stop the tug of war, to stop the flag rush, and they instituted a tug of war at Clifton Pond instead, which Clifton Pond was basically in the sinkhole that is in front of Young Library today. And that's because Clifton Pond was part of that neighborhood, Clifton Heights. You can see there some of the buildings in the background. And that is the neighborhood that UK took over in order to build Young Library in the 90s. So here's a picture of the one of the classes, either the first years or the sophomores, getting ready to pull. And then here's a picture of people in the lake. And in some pictures you can see it was a huge rope and it stretched all the way across the lake. And I'm not sure if you can see that in this picture or if what we're seeing is a reflection, but you see how wet everybody got. All right, so another really important tradition at UK for a really long time has been homecoming. And it looks like it started about 1916. And of course, one of the key components of that is the football game. And we have here two football program covers, one from 1932, where the football game was played at Stoll Field, and one from 1984, when, of course, it was played at Commonwealth Stadium. The band is a key component of homecoming. You see here in 1960, the band is forming UK. And by the way, the band at that point was men only. Women didn't start being in the band until 78, I think, something like that, except for a brief moment during World War II when women were in the band because there weren't enough men to make up the band. And you see here the drum line of the band in the 2000s and 2010. That's also at homecoming. So another feature of homecoming was, and I'm not entirely sure if it still is, that fraternities and sororities put decorations up around their houses to both welcome alumni back for homecoming, as well as to build up school spirit for the Wildcats to beat their opponents during the homecoming football game. So you see here a view from 1985 and also a view from 1949. And this Wildcat here, this is an icon that I've seen in other places. And I was really glad to find this photo because I haven't been able to date it. So I know that it at least goes back to the 1940s. Here's a great fraternity house decoration from 1957, the Stir 'em Up Cats. And of course, there was a really important homecoming parade, and you can see here a 1954 parade float. There were a lot of school spirit activities. In at least the 1960s, if not before and after, there was a Yell Like Hell competition, which all the fraternities and sororities entered, and the different ones got prizes for who yelled the loudest. And then later on, that was called the Roar. And you see here from 1996, a picture of the Wildcat mascot at the Roar. There were sometimes also bonfires at night as part of building school spirit. Cheerleaders are always a part of homecoming. You see here a picture from 1966. And then I love this picture of somebody in the stands at McLean Stadium catching a game ball from that homecoming game. And of course, there has been always a homecoming court. Mostly it's been a queen and her attendants. I love this picture from the 1930s with the queen with her corsage and the band behind her. This is again at McLean Stadium. And then we have a couple of pictures of, in 1992, both the homecoming king and queen were crowned, as well as in 2006. And that hasn't always been the case, that there's been a king as well. So as I've sort of intimated, the Greek system and Greek life at UK has been a key component of life, student life. I think the first Greek organizations began in the 1890s. I should have that date. It might be 1893, but they've grown to become a significant part of the school. So you see, and Rush is one of the big events in the life of the Greek society. So we see here some women and men participating in Rush in 1965. This great sign from 1969 about Rush for the Phi Sigma Kappas, and a group of men visiting a fraternity house in 1984. And then some views from later in the decade and into the 2000s. So one of the really key events at UK that I think, in my estimation, has kind of taken over from Little Kentucky Derby is the Dance Blue Dance Marathon. So that has started in 2005, and it's going to the present, and it's raised a significant amount of money for children's cancer research. And probably everybody here knows what it's all about, but it's basically people who participate don't sit down and dance for 24 hours. And it's basically, I think, pretty much been held in Memorial Coliseum, and it's a really important part of UK activities. All right, so I'm at my final words, and I see that we will have some time for questions and comments. So hopefully we can have a little bit of a conversation. So from 1916 in the course catalog, what I think is really interesting about this comment is this is at a time when the university is just starting to find its footing as a university. And the final words are sort of future looking. The university will do a great work in advancing the educational interests of Kentucky. And the focus was to be non-denominational, meaning not religious, and to afford equal advantages to all, exclusive privileges to none. Of course, we know that that's a little bit more complicated these days because we are still trying to find places that are welcoming for women and for students of color. In 1965, in our 100th year, this is when the university is really starting to understand more what its mission is. Its major function is as a teaching institution, but also serving as a center for research, service, and for preservation of knowledge. And then in 2015, we really, in this statement, have put research in front, as well as community outreach and rigorous education and technological advances that not only work to better the Commonwealth, as well as touching the lives of people throughout the state, the nation, and the world. And I think definitely the student life, what students bring to the university, that's a key component of what the university is all about. So thank you very much. This is my email. This is a picture of me in my office pre-pandemic. My office is always full of boxes and papers and things that need to be worked on. So thank you very much. And what else should we talk about?
Ruth, I love all of the old images that you shared. I was eating it up. In fact, our little Family Weekend 2.0 team is here live in the Gatton Student Center down in the Cat's Den game room. And so some of my colleagues have been making fun of me as I have been talking back to the screen. Fortunately, I've been muted, but I have been responding. And even talking to some of the current students who are here in the Cat's Den with us, asking, if we brought back the Hello Walk, would anybody participate in it today? And things like that. They've told me maybe not to get my hopes up, but I don't know. As we look to plan K-Week this fall, I may see what we can do.
I think one of the real things that I see is as the number of people simply just expands and expands, some of these traditions that were easy to do in the first part of the 20th century just become really difficult to do, I think, just because of the sheer numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you imagine during a traditional non-pandemic class change, how long it would take if you tried to say hello to everyone you passed? Like, everyone would be late to class all the time. One of the other things that I was reflecting on as you were talking, and I've been working remotely for most of this last year, so I haven't been on campus quite as much, but have been fortunate to be here so far this weekend. I love the old touches that you can see on campus, the signs of university history as you're walking around. For example, you had an image of the KSC sign that I mentioned in the chat is still able to be seen on campus. And I can't even think of how many years I had gone to school and worked on this campus before I noticed that sign. And so am I correct that it's on Buell Armory?
Yeah, I couldn't remember if it's on Barker or Buell, but they're connected.
I treat them as one and the same.
Yeah. And I think it's actually next to, because there are two stairs that go up, and I think it's on Barker actually. But if people go there, they will see where that it's there. It's the link, and you have to look up. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. But I think about all the folks who walk past that building as they're going in and out of our Gatton Student Center and may never have noticed, but that sign
Right.
from the past is absolutely right
Right.
there.
Very. Yeah.
And then even reflecting on your Zoom background there with the King Library and
Right.
talking to alums who talk about the bridge that used to be there between King Library and the little fine arts
Right.
library.
Yeah. In fact, that no, I guess it's not this window here. You actually can't see it. It would have come through that window right there, basically across the patio to what is now Little Fine Arts, but it was King Library. I get my directions mixed up.
Yeah, it was all
Library
part of the
there.
same building. It was connected.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I've talked to a lot of alums who talk about that. I guess there was study space maybe there in that bridge, but it was a very social space. And I know from talking to today's students that there's different parts of Young Library that they go to when they need absolute quiet and really want to study, and that there's parts of the library they go to when they are there to study, but also really want to talk to people.
Right. I think it's just in general. Certainly, we in the library talk a lot about sort of the dynamics of space usage in libraries, that it's not just it's a community gathering space, not just for studying. And certainly, I would say it's been, so this is not the original library building. There was a Carnegie Library that was built in 1912, very cute little building, which was demolished 1960s, something like that. And part of Whitehall is basically on the space where that used to be. And I'm not sure if that one was so much a gathering space as when this one was built, and it's so much bigger. And there was a cafeteria in the bottom. People who come into the building talk about smoking also, like having smoking rooms in the building. And, it's funny to think of, but smoking was something that happened everywhere on campus for a really long time. And in some of the pictures, you see people having cigarettes in their mouths and stuff like that. And we forget about that too, that was a key part of life.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking about the student center prior to some of the most recent expansions and renovations. There was a meeting room that is no longer in the current building, but there was a room that I had been told, even though I never saw it used for this purpose, that I had been told was a room where students went to listen to music. I think there were a lot of like jacks in the wall, and you could go and I guess maybe select a record or something to listen to. And I mean, we take that for granted now that we all have our phones that we can listen to music on, things we can stream to. And so that was a service that the university would provide, was a place, an outlet to go and listen to music in that space.
Yeah, that actually reminds me something that I thought I wasn't going to have enough time to put in everything that I had discovered when I was doing research for this. But one of the things that was super interesting is that, so Barker Hall was called Alumni Hall when it was first built. And all of the student organizations, or many of them anyway, not the Greek system so much, but the other student organizations had rooms in Barker Hall. And some of those rooms, like they advertised, had a telephone for free that people could use, for example. Or there was a room where you could go read newspapers. Or there was a room with free stationery so that you could write letters without like using your own paper. So it just really gives a sense. So this, I'm talking now sort of 1910s, 20s-ish time period. It just brings into focus again some of what you're saying, that we take for granted just the sheer availability of paper, not needing to use paper to communicate, for example. How all the different ways that we can communicate with each other, that the university in earlier times had to provide as a good or benefit to students. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a question that has come in from a parent who's watching. They're asking for anything we can share about the connection between Transylvania and UK. The family shares that they have students at both schools, and heard your reference to universities, Oranges, and the tie to Transy.
Yeah, so Transylvania was in Lexington starting in, probably the parent knows this already, 1792-ish, I think, was when it was founded. But it was starting to have financial difficulties sort of in that mid 1860s time period, maybe even a little bit before. And at the same time as that happened, John Bryan Bowman, who is the person who raised the money for the original campus for A&M College, He was basically trying to get a comprehensive statewide university up and running, basically through his own means. And he had started in Harrodsburg, and he'd started a university called Kentucky University there. And then they had a big fire in 1864 and basically lost everything. So he had to start over from scratch. And at that time, the legislature was considering whether to take up the Morrill Act offer too. So Bowman went to the legislature, and also, I don't remember the chain of events, but basically Transylvania said, we will offer to host A&M College if the legislature gives us money. And Bowman said, I really want a comprehensive university, and I'll go in with the A&M College if the legislature sort of sets up a Kentucky university. And then there was this whole rigmarole about where it was going to be, and sort of because Transylvania was offering their buildings and their infrastructure to Kentucky University at Harrodsburg, which had lost all of that. So basically by 1865, it had all gotten consolidated in Lexington. So until 1878, as I said, A&M College was a part of that Kentucky University. So it was a little complicated because Kentucky University was a private university, but A&M College was a public institution. And that caused a lot of friction. There were a lot of, and Kentucky University was denominational. It was Church of Christ or Disciples of Christ or something like that. So by 1878, that relationship had become really fraught. And so the legislature made A&M College that separate institution. Kentucky University continued on as a university without A&M College until I've forgotten now, I should remember if it was 1908 or 1916. I think it was 1916 when the legislature changed the name of State University to University of Kentucky. And that's when the former Kentucky University became Transylvania University again. So basically we were the same institution, 1865 to 1878, and then not the same institution. But there was a name change for both in 1916.
Yeah, and I think so much of the character of Lexington is influenced by the presence of not only the University of Kentucky, but Transylvania University and Bluegrass Community and Technical College. We're very fortunate to have all of those institutions right here within Lexington.
And I should mention for those that, and I'm sure many of the adults listening in will know, that the community college system was a part of the university from 1956 to 1997, I think, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a significant component of the university's land grant mission, basically, for that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recall when the Kentucky General Assembly decided that the community and technical college system was going to split off from UK, and yeah, that was a big deal. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can only imagine how complicated that was.
Yeah. The other memory that I've been reflecting on as you've been talking is the memory of the administration building, the main building fire in 2001. And I was not in Lexington at the time, but my father was working on the UK campus, and distinctly remember, of course, this was, still before maybe everybody was carrying cell phones, but I remember that I was not in Lexington, but was in central Kentucky, and had a friend who stopped me and said, I just saw in the news that there's a big building at UK on fire. And I remember running back to my apartment and turning on the news to try to figure out what was going on, and seeing those images of university staff trying to take the original portraits of the university's presidents and getting them out of the building safely, and folks just standing around and watching our original building, the only one that was left, watching it burn.
Interestingly, one of the real challenges for archival research in general is that there was a big fire both at Transy and at UK that destroyed a lot of records. So that fire that you just talked about, that's the one there's some records we don't have because they were in the main building and we've lost them. Similarly with Transy, there are early records of A&M College and of Kentucky University that they lost in their old main fire in 1940, I think, or something like that. It was in the early part of the 20th century. So, when I think of fire, I not only think of the building, but I think of all the things that were inside it that people were storing there, because there's sort of an association between early documents and early buildings. And so they seem to go together. But the challenge is that the environment for the early documents might not actually be the best in the early buildings. Although my understanding, and you probably, and those people on the call know more than me probably, but that was a spark, like the building had just been renovated and it was a spark from sort of the last pieces of the renovation that ignited like in the ceiling or something like that. So it was totally unexpected and quite a tragedy.
Yes, it was definitely part of a renovation that, yeah, my understanding is that it was nearing completion. And so, yeah, folks didn't expect that one renovation would lead to the fire. And then my recollection of the time is that though it gave the opportunity to really think about, what that building could be, and that there were, in the devastation, that there were some original features of the building that had been covered up in later renovations that were able to be revealed, things that you can see in our Lexmark public room right now, original columns and things like that, now where those portraits of the university presidents hang. So I also had the opportunity at the time that the post-fire renovation, that grand reopening celebration happened, and the opportunity to hear from Dr. Thomas Clark, who at the time, was, I don't know, was maybe in his 90s, and was known as one of Kentucky's foremost historians, and one who I, as a student of history, had occasionally seen in the university archives when I was doing research for some of my own papers. And I thought, oh, Dr. Clark and I, we are just here, two scholars, and hearing him talk about what that building was in his time as a university student, and then getting to see it. I believe that grand reopening was maybe around 2004. And him getting to see the building after the fire, that was a really cool opportunity. And, interesting to think about those connections between the past use of our buildings and what they are now.
Right. I'm actually thinking about, that wasn't the only fire, of course, on campus. And there have been some other fairly significant ones. I'm thinking the original Guignol Theater actually was on the corner of Euclid and Limestone in a wooden structure. And that burned I've forgotten. It's before the Fine Arts Building was built. And so the Guignol Theater got a space in the Fine Arts Building in part because that building then was no longer there. And then, of course, there was the ROTC annex that was also burned under mysterious circumstances in 1970, I think. And that was part of not a very significant amount of student protest, but some student protest sort of between 69 and 1971-ish. And there were other ones like, I think, was it Frazee? There was some of those buildings there around the side there from the main building also have burned. And then, of course, there are lab fires and things like that. So, the university is, it changes a lot. And sometimes the changes are forced upon it.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes they are sort of thought through and planned for and stuff like that. So interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where the renovation of Frazee Hall that's just gotten underway, where that will lead. And I've got some personal vested interest in it because the UK Parent and Family Association will be moving into the first floor of Frazee after the renovation. And so I've gotten to sit in on a couple of design conversations and really intentional, thought being put into how we retain some of the historic character of the building, but retrofitting it for more modern purposes and today's students and staff.
One of the things that I like to remember when I'm walking around that part of campus is that there was this whole women's enclave that was sort of on that part of campus. So Patterson Hall was built across Euclid, 1904, sort of like keep the women protected and safe. And then basically, most of them, I think, were doing education, and that was the education building until Taylor Ed was built. And so I think a lot about sort of the women kind of making that walk kind of from Patterson Hall to Frazee Hall and back again. And the women's dorm was right there. I can't remember now if it was in Barker or if Alumni Gym was built originally for women. I forget these details, but there was this whole little sort of like place where women hung out. And then more women's dorms were built there, but all of those now have been demolished. And we are in a much more sort of open space, I think, in terms of where people live, and especially in relation to gender and gender identity. So that's been an interesting change as well, to see the campus open up some for people to be in and not be so restricted.
Absolutely. And then even thinking about all of the residence hall construction that's happened in recent years, and those new buildings being given the old names, which
Right.
I think has been a nice nod to the past, although occasionally gets confusing for folks like me who've worked on campus for the last 18 years and thinking about what's where, or even thinking, I know that some alums had mixed feelings about the demolition of the Kerwin Blanding complex on South Campus. But I think obviously today's students wanted some more modern residential facilities, but I've seen the university, again, give that nod to the past by keeping the alleyway of trees intact and converting that to some green space for the meantime.
So I'll just give a shout out. We have a Facebook group for Kerwin Blanding residential complex memories. So anybody who's watching this and would like to Google that, we would love to have any photographs or memories that you have of the complex. We are preserving that in the archives so that we sort of have a record, a little bit of what that meant to people. I'm really interested in Kerwin Blanding because, again, it was one of the first, it wasn't the first, but one of the first co-ed living experiences at UK. And in the graduate dorms, was it co-ed by room? Remember. Anyway, so I think it came along at a really interesting time of change for how the university related to students, sort of moving away, especially for women, moving away from being very restrictive in terms of what students could do, having to sign in, sign out, what they could or could not wear on campus at different times for different circumstances, things like that, into a more free, less rule-bound existence. Although students who are listening to this may think that there are still a lot of rules. But when you look at especially what women students had to do to be students on campus, it was much more restrictive than it is now. And so I associate Kerwin Blanding with that time of loosening and, questioning authority and stuff like that, that we kind of maybe take a little bit for granted right now. I'm not sure if that's really true, but certainly was a big change, in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, my goodness, Ruth, you and I could talk about this all day. I don't know if there would be any more YouTube viewers, but you and I could talk about this all day. And you probably can't see the YouTube chat right now, but you have some great comments. What an incredible presentation you shared. Thank you. And then same person says, you have such a depth of knowledge, Ruth. Thank you so much for sharing. Another mom whose name is Nancy, so it's a great name, says, fabulous history. Being from Pennsylvania, we had no idea. Thank you so much. So echoing what they're saying, Ruth, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise and being part of our Family Weekend 2.0. Families who are watching, there are more activities to come, including a virtual rock, paper, scissors tournament today at 1:30. All the details are on the Family Weekend website, and I will put that in the chat in just a moment. Ruth, any last words?
Just so much appreciation to all the people who organized Family Weekend 2.0. It's been such a hard time for us with the pandemic, and to get this up and running to build community, I think has been great. So thanks to all of you.
Well, we are so glad that you could be part of it and appreciate the time you've given. Everyone, have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you for future Family Weekend 2.0 events. Thanks, and take care.
Bye, everybody.